Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang, your intel in the Philippine markets and the economy. In the headlines, the Bureau of Internal Revenue suspends all field audit and related operations amid allegations of abuse. Regional think tank AMRO S&P Global Ratings a downgrade forecast for the Philippine economy this year and in 2026. And the Department of Economy, Planning and Development is confident the Philippines' fourth quarter GDP will bounce back above 5%. We have an excerpt from my thought leader's conversation with DepDem Undersecretary Rosemary Edilion.
It is really to address calamity. There are, procedures are being streamlined so that it's easier to disburse, it's easier to implement the projects.
The Bureau of Internal Revenue has suspended all field audit operations after complaints surfaced on the misuse of letters of authority. Newly minted BIR Commissioner Charlito Mendoza ordered a pause yesterday in the issuance and signing of LOAs and mission orders. Mendoza said the BIR will review its processes to protect taxpayer rights and strengthen the agency's audit processes. The suspension comes after Senator Erwin Tulfo filed Senate Resolution 180 calling for an investigation into the alleged money-making scheme by BIR examiners wherein they extort businesses through LOAs. Businessmen approached Tulfo's office to complain about examiners issuing LOAs to audit their books despite them complying with all tax requirements. A company, for instance, would pay the assessed tax of $150 million, but only $100 million would be put on paper. The remaining $25 million would go to the examiner, and another $25 would be declared as discount.
Habang abalang-abala po tayong lahat dito po sa flood control, may nangyayari pong korupsyon naman dito po sa Bureau of Internal Revenue. Kaya po nasabi ko po nga pangalawa sa korupsyon na ahensya. Number 1 po ang DPWH, pangalawa po ang Bureau of Internal Revenue. Dahil sobra-sobra po yung kanilang ginagawa. Kahit nagbayad na po yung isang negosyante, negosyo ng kanyang buwis, i-inspeksyonin pa po.
As for the Department of Finance, newly appointed Chief Frederick Go vowed to protect the tax-paying public from abuse by undertaking a comprehensive review of its policies. Former BIR Chief Kim Henares acknowledged that LOAs can be an avenue for corruption by being repeatedly issued to the same businesses.
It can be weaponized if you don't have any control measure. No? How do you control it? By setting policies on who you can audit. You cannot just have a free for all that you can audit anyone. Normally, there's a policy that there's a big discrepancy.
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas says it plans to continue setting a range instead of having a precise goal for inflation target. This after a former Bank of Thailand governor urged central banks to be more flexible in their frameworks. PSP Governor Eli Remolona noted that with inflation at 1.7%, even below the current 2 to 4% range, the Philippines should not be too concerned about a precise number. He also said that inflation expectations remain anchored, though the BSP is developing a tool to measure this more accurately. Meanwhile, Remolona said a cut in banks' reserve requirement ratio is on the table, but there is no urgency as the BSP continues to assess market liquidity. The Philippines' weak third-quarter growth has prompted another round of outlook downgrades. In a report, S&P Global Ratings cut its Philippine growth forecast to 4.8% this year from its earlier projection of 5.6%. That's well below the government's 5.5% to 6.5% target. At the same time, AMRO also lowered its outlook to 5.2% from 5.6% previously. It noted that corruption concerns and weak state spending pulled third-quarter GDP down to 4%, the slowest in over 4 years. Should these forecasts materialize, the economy would grow much slower than the 5.7% in 2024. Both institutions also trimmed their 2026 forecast to 5.7% and S&P 5.3% for Ambro as private investment, exports, and public projects faced continued headwinds. Undersecretary Rosemary Edelion says at least 5% economic growth is achievable for the fourth quarter, especially as calamity funds make their way into helping disaster-stricken provinces recover. Here's an excerpt from my interview on thought leaders with Yusek Edelion.
In terms of the mechanisms to address the corruption, so as you know, there's lots of hearings that are going on. On the part of the executive, what we are doing now is still also with respect to the investigation, plus also ways on how we can, at least prevent, making sure that it will be a bit more difficult to commit this, all this hanky-panky. So we have the Project Dime, which is the digital imaging monitoring and evaluation, and so we are encouraging the public to actually be involved in this, because it takes all of us actually to make sure that this does not happen again. We make sure that we prevent it from happening even. So this one will actually has geotagged all these infrastructure projects. They are visible online, and so you can do a real-time monitoring. We are encouraging the NGOs, the civil society, to please visit all these places and send us real-time pictures. And of course, us at DepDev, we're also ramping up our monitoring and evaluation, not just of this flood control projects, but the other projects as well. Now, for the fourth quarter, our discussion has been, and actually the instruction also of the President, is to accelerate the spending on the disaster recovery. Because as you know, we've had two, actually, well, more than two typhoons, but the super typhoons were your Tino and Uwan. And we know that a lot have suffered the loss of property. There were also loss of lives. But for the loss of property, there has to be an accelerated, there was a release already of the funds that are needed for that. Even the government infrastructure that was destroyed, but also private property. There will be assistance that will be given to them.
In fact, we're under a state of calamity
Yes,
as we speak, and that
that's
goes
right.
on for 1 year.
1
since
year.
November 7th.
That's right.
So how much of a bump up might that give the fourth quarter, and can that be sustained?
Well, for the year, yeah. Actually, what that means is that the government agencies can now tap their quick response funds, because and even the LGUs can now make use of their calamity fund. As you know, it takes a declaration of a state of calamity before you can use that.
Catch the full interview on Thought Leaders, 9 p.m. Philippine Standard Time on One News and on our social media channels. PDP Laban is calling on President Bongbong Marcos to step down. Party Deputy Spokesperson Attorney Ferdinand Topacio told One News Storycon the president is facing a credibility crisis and a weakened political base that affects his ability to lead. Topacio clarified, though, that the PDP Laban does not support a military junta or any unconstitutional move to change leadership, emphasizing that any transition must follow the processes set by the Constitution.
It cannot be a ploy if the Constitution itself provides for it. Now, if the president thinks that the vice president should succeed, then it is his option whether to resign or not. But the president must realize that he struggles on, he soldiers on as president with a deeply depleted political base and a much reduced political capital and a crisis of credibility.
Here are the headlines from around the globe. In Nigeria, 50 of the 303 kidnapped children from a Catholic school on Friday have escaped. A military-led search is underway to rescue the remaining 253 children, along with their 12 teachers. Schools are closed following a spate of kidnappings. In Kebi, 25 pupils from a boarding school have been abducted, while 38 kidnapped from a church service in Quara were freed on Sunday. No one has publicly claimed responsibility for the assaults. In Japan, the government is moving forward in deploying missiles in Yonaguni, an island just 100 kilometers northeast of Taiwan. Japan's defense minister said the move will help lower the chance of an armed attack in the country. But China described the deployment as extremely dangerous. The foreign ministry said this will widen the rift between the two nations and heighten regional tensions. And in South Africa, the group of 20 nations concluded its summit with a renewed commitment to multilateral cooperation in addressing global challenges such as climate change. But the summit was not able to the absence of the U.S. President Trump boycotted the two-day event over debunked allegations that South Africa persecutes its white minority. And you're watching Money Talks. COP30's omission of stronger emission-cutting measures and the Philippines' absence from those pushing for just transition away from fossil fuels are deeply disappointing, say Filipino climate advocates. For People Profit Planet, we speak with John Leo Algo, National Coordinator of Aksyon Klima Pilipinas, the Philippines' largest civil society network for climate action. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. Chip stocks and other tech shares rallied this Monday, bolstering U.S. markets. The Nasdaq jumped by nearly 2.7%. S&P 500 rose by 1.5%, and the Dow climbed by 0.4%. Investors are also optimistic by the revived hopes of a rate cut this December, following comments from San Francisco's Fed president. Meanwhile, benchmark 10-year Treasury yields ticked down to 4.035%. Gold prices advanced to $4,091 per ounce. U.S. futures are little changed in after-hours trading. S&P and Nasdaq both up by less than 0.1%, and the Dow falls by less than 0.1%. Asian markets are tracking Wall Street's tech rally this Tuesday. South Korea's Kospi up by 1.25%. Japan's Nikkei 225 climbs by 0.8%, and Australia's ASX 200 rises by less than 0.1%. And a look at our own markets. PSEI opening this Tuesday lower by less than 0.1% at 6,016. Investors lifted the stock market back to the 6,000 level yesterday, with the Bourse improving by 0.4%. Investors went on a buying spree, with sentiment improving amid expectations of another rate cut. The broader all-shares index jumped by over 3%, with local counters mostly in the green. As for the Philippine peso, it opens today a tad weaker, 58.93 to the dollar. The peso slid by just 1.5 centavos to close at 58.87 against the greenback, tracking sideways movement among regional currencies. The 10-year government bond yields have ticked up to 5.915%. In corporate news, the SM Group remains optimistic and committed to investing in the Philippines despite current challenges. SM Prime Executive Committee Chair Han See said the group is choosing to keep investing even amid weak sentiment and perceived risks. He acknowledged being affected by recent national issues, but stressed that now is not the moment for the private sector to pull back. See said businesses have a responsibility to provide value, opportunity, and stability, a duty that becomes even more critical in difficult times. And Meralco is setting a capital expenditure budget of 26 to 30 billion pesos for 2026 to fund major upgrades in its distribution network. Meralco Executive Vice President and COO Ronnie Aperocho said next year's budget will be higher than this year's 25 billion pesos to support projects meant to improve customer service. The spending will cover customer applications, new substations, and the replacement of aging distribution facilities. He also said Meralco is preparing trials for an underground cable system within its franchise area. The proposed capex falls under the first regulatory period rate reset beginning next year, a process that requires utilities to submit forecasted spending and project plans for approval. Meralco and Signal, the owner of this channel, are both part of the MVP Group. Filipino climate advocates who attended the recently concluded COP30 in Belém, Brazil, expressed disappointment over the omission of stronger emission-cutting measures. They also lament the Philippines' absence from the 24 nations that have banded together to push for just transition away from fossil fuels. With us now for more is John Leo Algo, the National Coordinator for Aksyon Klima Pilipinas. He attended COP30 in Belém but now speaks to us from Boston. Good seeing you, JL. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Ms. Cathy, and good morning to all the viewers of Money Talks.
So first off, kamusta ka na after the fire broke out in Belém? Where were you when thousands were led out of the conference venue?
Actually, at the time, me and my colleague from the Philippines, we were just taking pictures outside at the COP30 sign, and we actually just came into the venue, and then just a few minutes later, we saw people running, and we thought it was part of a protest, but as it turns out, it was a fire. So we just grabbed our bags and calmly got out of there as quickly as we can, along with the thousands in attendance at COP30.
That's good. It's good to know that you're safe, and it's your seventh, so it's probably one of those that stands out among the 7 UN climate change conferences that you've attended. What is your level of hope at this juncture with the way things had gone in Belém beyond the fire?
You know, having attended 7 climate COPs by this point, you start to hear the same messages and you get frustrated by the very slow and inefficient pacing of how they make decisions to address the climate crisis, especially from the perspective of vulnerable countries like the Philippines. But at the same time, as emphasized in one of the news items mentioned earlier in the program, the importance of multilateralism cannot be understated, because the only way to address the climate crisis is to really work together among different countries to be able to reduce the pollution and enable vulnerable countries like the Philippines to adapt to the worsening impacts of climate change.
You know, one would think those inefficiencies you mentioned might have been addressed by the non-participation of the U.S., because this is the first international climate conference since Trump abandoned the international cooperation on global warming. So what dent did that make now against climate vulnerable and disaster-prone nations like ours?
Well, to be honest, the absence of the U.S. is not, in the negotiations in particular, is not exactly as impactful as expected, because there are still nearly 200 countries that were in Belém just a couple of days ago to be able to make these kinds of decisions. But in terms of the dent that the absence of the U.S. has made on climate action, globally speaking, I think the biggest impact is on the absence of available financing and other resources. And that has already been felt pretty much the moment Donald Trump started his second term as president. And it has affected the work of a lot of climate projects, including some of the members of my network in Aksyon Klima Pilipinas as civil society organizations. A lot of our projects by our members have been terminated basically because of the restricted access to funding.
And it becomes even more restricting right now, as we know that we do not have direct access to the funding that's been approved in Belém. Is that correct?
As of the moment, a lot of the funding is inaccessible, and especially in terms of the most vulnerable communities. We're talking about those that were just hit. For example, by the typhoons that have hit our country. And of course, our indigenous peoples, the women, children, and youth, urban poor, farmers, and among others, they are the ones who need these climate funds more than pretty much anyone else, but they're the ones that have the most difficult time accessing, if not directly receiving the funds because of a lot of the bureaucracy at the global and even at the Philippine level.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate because as we speak, the 22nd tropical cyclone of the year, Verbena, is barreling through the Philippines. And these cyclones all coming in quickened cadences with far little space each time and are impacted communities to recover. And that's not even including the quakes in Cebu, Davao Oriental experienced just a week apart. So what bigger risks do we now face with climate finance not on the table for us?
I think we need to emphasize that while we wait for these climate COPs to really make the important decisions, the accelerated decision making that countries like the Philippines needs, we will still be hit by these typhoons and droughts and sea level rise and all other climate impacts moving forward. And we can't just wait until these global funds become even more accessible because we're being hit now and we've been hit the last 2 years during these climate COPs. So from our perspective, that's why it's very important to really address the domestic level issues regarding access to climate funds. And in particular, we're talking about our national budget. You know, I was watching the excerpt from the interview with the DepDev representative earlier in the show. And yes, she mentioned the need for accelerated disbursement of disaster funds, but that's not enough. We need to think long term as well. We really need to have that changed approach to how we allocate our national budget such that it really aligns towards genuine climate solutions. It can't just be always physical infrastructure, especially with flood control projects that are now exposed and most likely have been exposed to corruption. We need to fund genuine climate solutions, especially reforestation, nature-based solutions. We need to help our farmers. We need to help our fisher folks. We need to have more climate resilient housing. We need to have genuine climate solutions be funded by domestic funds, by taxpayers' money.
So given that focus that you've just expressed and knowing that we are in a state of calamity for the rest of the year until November 7th of 2026, what can the government do to change its approach and be aligned to the NDCs?
Well, first of all, we need to have an NDC because at the moment, as of the moment, Ms. Cathy, our country still has not finalized our second nationally determined contribution or our plan to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Now, we have been engaging very closely with the government and we have been monitoring this process since December last year. And they have explained it to us that the reason why there has been no updated NDC yet is because they really want to make sure that it's substantively sound, meaning it's actually based on economy-wide calculations and that proper sectors have been consulted. But of course, we have to also balance between urgency and due diligence. And at the moment, the longer that we don't have an NDC, the longer it will become unclear about what our national plan really is to mitigate climate change.
Are you getting some help from government at this stage with everybody just so paralyzed about what's going on here with the corruption allegations? I've seen some pictures that you've sent over. Some of the representatives in Congress did attend COP30. What's been the impact so far with the continuing collaboration that you wanted to establish or even maintain at a very precarious state our country's in?
Well, like I said earlier, yes, there is a tremendous problem in our national governance at the moment, and that needs to be resolved as soon as possible, if not yesterday or even a few years ago, to be honest with you. But again, we still need to continue the work because typhoons are still going to hit us, droughts are still going to hit us. So it's important to continue addressing other avenues of national governance, especially against the climate crisis. So that's why in Brazil, on the sidelines of COP30, we really made sure that we were able to directly engage with representatives, well, from our House of Representatives. And these congressmen and congresswomen, they are the ones that are directly involved, for example, in I'd just like to mention this particular bill. We call it the Climate Accountability Bill that aims to help reduce loss and damage that our country is experiencing. And we also did with them another debriefing, Ms. Cathy, that specifically pertains to what I mentioned earlier, to make sure that our national climate budget is really aligned with genuine climate solutions.
Just as a final point, we can't go it alone, and we need the help of others in the world. As fractious talks kept the mention of fossil fuels in the approved language, two countries took a step forward. Colombia and Netherlands. They came up with the first international conference on just transition away from fossil fuels. But I'm looking at the list here, and the Philippines isn't part of it. I mean, we have much more at stake than these 24 nations as the most climate vulnerable and most disaster prone in the world. But we're not part of it. How come?
Well, from our perspective and in our dialogues with representatives of the Philippine government delegation in Brazil last week at COP30, what we found out is that the main reason why our country is not part of these group of countries that are directly calling for a just transition away from fossil fuels is because of our national circumstances. And what that means is, at the moment, our country's power sector is still highly privatized. And what that means is from the perspective of civil society groups, we think that it's influenced by fossil fuel lobbying, at least from the national level. And of course, what the Philippines carries at the climate COPs is reflective of national positions and circumstances as well. So that is why we think that our country is not, at least for the moment, supporting this particular declaration. But I like to point out as well, Ms. Cathy, that from previous COPs as well, the Philippine government has been silent when it comes to almost anything related to fossil fuel transition. And I think that needs to really be addressed moving forward, especially if at the national level, it has been mentioned by this current administration that one of their priorities, number one, is the climate agenda, and number two, renewable energy development. So we need to make sure that whatever they're saying at the global level matches what they do at the national level.
All right. Well, appreciate you speaking up, JL. Thank you so much for your insights. John Leo Algo, National Coordinator for Aksyon Klima Pilipinas. And that is it for Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. Catch us again tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. Kapatid, we are One News, all sides, all the time. Have a great day ahead.